Good morning, everyone. It's always good to come to camp meeting because it's a time when we can refresh ourselves, we can be blessed. And more than that, we have a closer relationship with our Lord and we can meet family and friends. Well, we are no stranger to most of you. And the lovely lady that you can see there is the one that I affectionately call Honey. I'm going to ask her to say hello to you.
Good morning, friends. Like Honey, I am delighted to be with you and to share this divine and great experience with you. I trust that at the end of this journey that we would grow to love Jesus better and that we'll be able to take care of our families and address some of the critical issues that inhibit our spiritual growth. Thank you for having us. By the way, today is our anniversary. So,
Thank you very much. You know, the first time I saw her, she was a little girl wearing ribbons and clips in her hair. I met her in college, and I made her a promise. I told her that if she married me, I would make her happy for the rest of her life. And you know, she believed me. But I'm glad I did not disappoint her. We want to talk with you this morning from our heart. As you know and would have heard, we're licensed clinicians, and we have been working with families and individuals for a long time now. As you can see, the topic that is there, mental health and the family. Honey, talk to us. We're living in an age when individuals are even afraid to use the word mental health.
unfortunately, when we hear the word mental, we think crazy. And because of that stigmatization, many people who have mental issues or mental health problems are afraid to identify. And so there are so many problems in our families as a result of this. And most times, the individuals don't necessarily get the help that is available, and so they suffer in silence. In any given church, you'd be surprised to know how many wounded members we have, but nobody talks about it, and sometimes the families themselves are afraid to come forward. So the day has come when we really have been trying to create awareness that it is okay to say we have a problem mentally. Now let me tell you, when you have a physical problem, we seek help, don't we? Even though we're Christians and we pray and we know that God's power is available to do all things. We have a cardiac problem, we find a cardiologist. We have a kidney problem, we find a nephrologist. When we have a mental health problem, we need to acknowledge it and go get help as well. So we're here today to bring awareness, to help to affirm people who have mental illnesses to understand that Jesus loves you and you're somebody special and that there's help for you.
And one of the problems she didn't talk about, and when I have a hunger problem, I go to her. Now, the World Health Organization that works around the world defines mental health as a state of being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their society, to their church, their family, etc. In other words, the way God created us, we were supposed to be individuals experiencing a certain amount of health. But because sin entered the world, just as how we have physical health, we also have mental health. And it's not that one is worse than the other. Both cases need help. And there's a lot you can do to help individuals, and that's some of what we need to talk about. Now let's look at the problem as it exists. Mental health problems is a growing public concern, as I said, around the world. They are prevalent not just here in the UK, but all around the world. But let's look at what's happening in your country. Every week, 1 in 6 adults experience a common mental health problem, such as anxiety or depression. 1 in 6 people. That's kind of a high statistic.
That is a high number, but it is consistent in many countries. At least 25%, 18 to 25% of the population experience mental health issues. So we're saying as a church community, we cannot put our head in the sand. The time has come when we have to understand this is a critical need. The services that are available for mental health concerns must be addressed, and we have got to support those events.
So what we are saying, every 6 people you come across, the chances are one of them is experiencing one form of mental health or another. Let's look at the statistics here in your country. 26% of the population has been diagnosed with a mental illness. 26%. And you know something, honey? It is said that another 18% of the UK population have experienced mental health. It's just that they have not gone in for a diagnosis. So we are talking about 8 and 6, that's
44%.
That's 30,
40%.
40. That's very, very high.
That is high. But again, it is consistent across the board because lots of people, like we say, don't acknowledge that they have a problem, are afraid to go for help, so they don't get diagnosed. Nevertheless, they're depressed or they're suffering from anxiety issues.
And what we find happening is that while someone would say, I'm having a heart issue or I'm having a backache or so, it's not, and it's accepted in the society. It's more difficult for someone to explain a mental issue that they're going through.
One of the problems is that we've been socialized as a church community to think that if we have a mental problem, we're not good Christians. Because good Christians should be able to pray and it should go away. And as a result, we are stigmatized. So when people are marginalized, they just don't come forward. And especially in a church community where everyone seems so holy and righteous, I cannot exhibit my flaws. And so we have got to break those barriers down. Because the person sitting beside you could be somebody who is very depressed, somebody who is wounded, carrying baggages from childhood, and you're preaching to them and you're ministering to them, and they are in pain, emotional and psychological pain. And so we've got to be able to be sensitive to that and find ways to help them cope.
There's something I'd like you to say to our people this morning, honey, and that is part of the problem we're having is the stigma that is associated with mental health, because once you use the term mental health issues, people right away think that you're saying that the person is
crazy.
Mentally crazy and or is a lunatic, or is that what the term really means?
No, it does not. As you said earlier, the goal of living, apart from acknowledging God's power in our lives and surrendering totally to Him and work with Him in unity with the Spirit to get back in harmony and get to heaven. While we're doing that, we've got to acknowledge that we're multi-dimensional. So there are different aspects of our lives that some sinful flaw will occur. Our brains are, this is just the brain that God has designed and created is such a fascinating organ. And just like in the other physical organs, we have dysfunctions. We have, glitches. So it is in our brains. Sometimes there are problems. Our brain is a fascinating complex organ. And sometimes there are short circuits and there are just challenges that prevent the messages as we process our mental thoughts getting from one place to the other. And it creates confusion and it creates misperceptions, etc. So we're susceptible and we're vulnerable. And no, we cannot stigmatize people who have mental health concerns.
Now, ladies, you need to take note of this statistic now. It says that women are more likely than men to experience common mental health disorder. As a matter of fact, right here in the UK, the statistic is suggesting that 31% of women compared to 17% of men in the UK population. So, ladies, it means that you have to understand that you have to manage well the stresses and strains of life. You have to manage well the challenges and the blows that come. And don't think that an individual who experiences a mental health issue is because the brain went wrong. It could be a result of stress, strain, challenges, and the way they absorb them and take it in. Eventually it starts to affect your mental processing. So it can start from emotional, psychological, physical, etc., and continue until it develops into a mental disorder. Here's some more statistics in your country here. Around 1 million people receive therapy for common mental disorder through your IAPT program, training program. That's improving access to psychological therapies. And here in the UK, they started this program in 2008. And from that time, the number of individuals who have been helped keeps increasing. And we're going to show you the cost, mental health and costs to your country. In the 2017-2018 year, the government spent $11.9 billion, $11.9 billion on mental health issues. That's a lot of money. Pounds, thank you. I kept saying dollars, it wouldn't be so bad. Pounds, excuse my North American concept. And you can see that it is growing because in the 2016-2017 year, it was 11.6 billion pounds. And in the 2015-2016, it was 11 billion pounds. So over this 2-year period, the increase was 3.7%. So the point we're here making and why we are talking about this issue this morning is that it's growing. And anything that happens in the society happens in the church and also happens in the family, because the society is composed of members of the church and members of the family. So this is the chronicity of the problem that we are dealing with.
So you can understand how difficult and how challenging it is for families to function well. We talk about having healthy marriages, raising our children well, and doing all these desired outcomes. But the reality is the baseline that we work with sometimes. Our families have problems. And sometimes these problems are not diagnosed appropriately and the help is not reciprocated. So we're here to say, if you're having some situations that you just don't know what else to do, you probably need to take your child or your spouse or whomever it is to get an assessment done, because it could be a chronic mental health problem.
Or there are things that we will talk about today to show you, if not dealt with early, it can lead to. So we're not suggesting that everybody's experiencing a mental health problem, but we are saying there are some of the strains and stresses of life, if not handled well, if not managed, then yes, they can push an individual to that experience. And it does deteriorate the family and children as well. Life expectancy also. They say an individual who experiences mental health illness is 8 times more likely to die. They live a shorter life than someone who does not have this problem?
Simply because they're so preoccupied with the wounds that they're carrying that they don't maximize their potential, and they don't make good judgment, and they don't live well because they have all this strain that they carry. There are lots of children in our society that's being sexually abused or neglected physically, or they have other emotional disturbances. And if those cases are not dealt with in childhood, these individuals carry them into adulthood. We don't get to just dispose them and leave them aside, except there is some intervention. Somebody that is helping this child understand this is not your fault. You were exploited. God loves you, and you can still view yourself as being special. A lot of these children perceive themselves as wounded, and we have a term we use, damaged good. So they see themselves as damaged, and they grow up to be individuals who have low self-worth, who have just little confidence in their capacity and ability to function, and they don't have fulfilled lives. So there's a consequence when we have individuals around us who have these horrible experiences and don't get appropriate help.
And as we pointed out, some of the things like physical illness, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterols, individuals more likely who suffer from these, that it can go on. Prolonged depression is another issue. As a matter of fact, it is said that individuals who are 50 years or older, there's a strong possibility that they could develop a stroke because of prolonged depression. And that is very important because, you know, when I was a child growing up, I didn't even know the word depression, let alone to say I'm depressed. The youngest of child these days, they're stressed out. They tell you I'm stressed. They're stressed, they're depressed, they are what have you. It's the age is a function of the time, the socialization which we are all a part of.
I'm not sure, honey, that the same thing is happening here in the UK, but I know in the US we have a large contingency of high school children. And now we're even finding in the middle school where these kids are already on psychotropic drugs. Many of them are taking Wellbutrin and Prozac and who knows what. And it is that they're diagnosed with depression and they just can't function and they make poor judgments and they have lots of problems. Recently, we have been having a spate of incidents in our schools where you see these school shootings and whatever. And as a result of that, there is a heightened awareness to the need to diagnose children with mental concerns early, because a lot of these children carry these wounds and they don't know where to go and what to do, and so they end up acting out their rage, and unfortunately in very sociopathic ways. So we've got to catch these problems real early and save our children and our families.
And the sad thing is that the everyday family, most of us as family members, we really don't know what to do. We are not prepared for it. We see our children act in a certain way and we just assume they will grow out of it. We see our loved ones or family members are behaving in a certain way and we pray, which is a good thing. We must always pray. But oftentimes, honey, we feel this sense of hopelessness and helplessness come over us.
Because we're not equipped. We don't know what to say. Even when our families function well, we sometimes have difficulty managing our life stresses. So you can understand when you have a family member or more than one acting in ways that just stretch your coping skills. Many parents are at a loss. I run a counseling practice in New York, and I cannot tell you, there's not a dull moment, and there's not a week we don't have families over their head with overwhelming stressors caused by dysfunctions and disruptions in their families. Parents don't know what to do with their children who are teenagers and are now acting out, and these kids were wounded from real early. Good that they brought them in at 16 or 15, but I wish they had taken them in when they spotted the problems and realized that this child was certainly not acting in an appropriate way. So we've got to be totally open to and sensitive to these issues in our families.
And then another problem is because of the stigma that society puts on it, we as family members, as church members, we are bombarded with the sarcasm, the kind of a look, the negative statements, the things that people have to say about us and our families if there's an individual that is experiencing mental health. And again, as we are using mental health, we are not saying that individuals have to reach the extreme end of the diagnosis where it becomes this mental illness. Early stages are still criticized, are still gossiped upon, etc., etc., etc. So individuals, it's like a two-pronged thing, is that one, we don't know how to deal with the problem, and two, there are people out there who are criticizing us and saying all these negative things. So what message might we say to our people in saying, if you know of someone who has a family member who is going through depression, a family member who is going through any of these symptoms, how do we relate to them? Do we join the bandwagon of criticism, or as Christians, what do we say or do?
We certainly should not we certainly should not criticize another person, at least until we have walked in their moccasin, right? But certainly, as Christians, we need to embrace each other, regardless of what the diagnosis is. And even if the person wasn't diagnosed, but you see a member sitting beside you looking really sad, everybody is just joyous and praising the Lord and coming to church and being active, and this person just seems isolated. They don't fit into social activities at church. They don't seem to have friends. They don't talk much to anyone. That's not a normal human reaction. You're gregarious and you want to be with people. And even if you're an introvert, you have at least one person that you can confide in. So yes, we've got to embrace each other, be very accepting of people regardless of what their physical, mental, or other conditions are, and help them get help. Be supportive, form a network that will help. But not only should we as individuals do that, as a church community, we really need to promote and foster and provide resources to assist counselors and people who, among our church community, needs help. There's a lot of sometimes social systems that provide support for these families, but sometimes the orientation that they take to their psychological care can be very anti-values, meaning they don't share the same values, so sometimes the orientation they give to counseling is not consistent with what our values are. So we need more people to get into the mental health disciplines. Encourage your children to go into psychological services, into counseling, into mental health, whatever it is that's here available, so that we can have Christian counselors also positioned to provide this kind of service.
And this is very important, here in the UK, as well as in the US and around, in the Adventist Church, we do not have enough individuals who are trained to help in this area. And a lot of times our members have to seek help outside, and not all the time the values are lining up. So yes, it's an area that we should also encourage our children to get involved in. Now, talking about causative factors, honey, when we talk about mental health, we're saying it can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be psychological. Now, what do we say to individuals here in terms of what might you do as a parent when you see early signs? What might you do to help along the continuum?
One of the first things you've got to do is to recognize when your child or your spouse or somebody in your family is acting other than normal, so that they withdraw. You see your child, they stay in their bedrooms, they don't try to relate to the family. Now we know sometimes there are other mitigating factors. Lots of children now with social media access do that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have a mental health problem. But you look for other things. So they're withdrawing from the family social system. They're not eating well. They're not sleeping. They're sometimes playing around with substances. So you might find paraphernalia in their book bags or in their room someplace. Search their drawers. I mean, I know I become the enemy when I tell parents to do that. Young people don't like that. But that's what you got to do. That's how you find out if they're doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So look in their book bag. Sometimes they scribble messages in the corners of their textbooks and their notebooks, trying to uncover or unleash some of the built-in stress that they're carrying. And they'll rattle notes to themselves or about themselves. So parents need to be very, very open to acknowledge that my child is exhibiting signs that scares me. And if I don't know what to do as a parent, then I need to go get help. But we can't harbor it and hide it and afraid to say it because we're going to be criticized. Your child is more valuable than any criticism that can be launched against the child or your spouse.
Let's share with you some things. When we use the term LCU, it means life-changing unit. There's a scale that is called a social readjustment rating scale, and it's composed of 43 live events, 43 events that we experience on a daily basis. It gives each event a numerical weight, a number, and the number indicates the intensity or the severity of the issue. This scale was developed by Warren Jacobs. Now, the social readjustment rating scale is something that Ray and Holmes, two doctors, they believe that when you add these scores up, and I'll soon bring them up so you can know what I'm talking about more definitely. When you add these scores up and you have a number of 150 life-changing units, then they're saying that you are prone to develop a mental health issue, and if it happens over a 6-month period. And then a major life crisis will hit you, will hit the family, if it reaches 300 and above over a 6-month period. So let's look at the chart, and I'll just give you some of the lists they have. As I told you, there are 42 items they have. For example, if there's a death in the family, the points, the LCU unit that they give to that is 95. Divorce, 73. Sexual difficulties, changes in finances, etc., etc., etc. Now, when you look at the list of the 43 items that they have there, every one of us in this room, there are many things on that list that is applicable to us. What Ray and Holmes are saying is, over a 6-month period, if you add these things that are relating to you and they get to 150, you are prone to develop a mental issue, whether it's depression, whatever the mental issue is. However, if over a 6-month period it adds up to 300, then they're saying you will get sick if you don't get some help. So the normal stresses of life, things you don't plan for, things you don't bargain, some of the things that life hits you with, adds up, takes a toll on your body. And if you're not conscious that you have to take some rest, get some exercise, sleep well, stop worrying, take things to the Lord in prayer, your numbers can add up, and before you know it, you are in some mental health problems. So let's look at some of the warning signs that are there. Confused thinking, social withdrawal, prolonged depression, feelings of extreme lows, excessive fears, worries and anxieties, dramatic changes in eating or sleeping.
One of the things that we should remember is that our bodies function well when it is relaxed. Our brains work at its highest potential when it is relaxed. There are hormones that God is such an amazing God. He has given us every instruction on how to stay well and healthy. He says, above all things, what does he do? He desires that we are in good health. And in order for us to do that, we have to ensure that we follow the laws of health. Our church has been blessed with information, but we need to translate that information to what? To action. So as Christians, we really need to take care of ourselves so that our bodies can function at optimum level. Our brains don't make good judgment. You wonder why some great Christians who love the Lord, you know they love the Lord from the experiences you've had with them, but they make poor judgments at times. Sometimes it is because they're stressed. And when you're stressed, the level of anxiety that you operate from restricts your capacity to reason and to make good judgment, because the cortical functions in the frontal lobe of your brain freezes. It doesn't work. It shuts down. And when you get anxious, do you know what you're doing? You're not thinking. You're not using your consciousness. You're actually operating from the limbic system, which is all emotion. So you wonder why some good Christian people get enraged and upset, because they stop thinking and they're merely upset. They're using just the emotions. And we get irate and angry, and those things are not coming from from the cortex. It is coming from the sympathetic system. So we've got to understand, in order for us to feel good, to be relaxed so we can think clearly, we've got to be rested. We've got to eat well. We have to be exercised, drink lots of water. All the laws of health that we learn, they work hand in hand. And that's why we get overwhelmed and depressed and anxious. The hormones can't secrete well. We depress some and we push others up, and the levels go out of balance, and our poor brain gets confused.
What we want you to understand, friends, is that mental health issues don't exist in a vacuum. There are warning signs, early signs. If undetected, if untreated, if left alone, will morph into something that is worse, will morph into a state where you now have to use medication to medicate the problem. And we always recommend, when individuals get to that stage, that they have to do talk therapy and medication. So you still have to see a mental health specialist, and you have to take medication. Both of us as clinicians, we don't like to put our clients on medication. We don't like to recommend the medication route, but sometimes they get to that stage where they have to take these psychotropic drugs to put a check on the brain that is just racing out of whack, before you can get them to the stage where you can use talk therapy to help to address the situation. But look at this warning signs that we're putting up there, folks, and understand the effect they have on the mind, the effect they have on the emotion. Some people just have an anger problem, and they just express the anger at all times. There are two areas in which that affects the family. One, if there are children in the family, that can destabilize that child or those children to the point where it pushes them into depression. It pushes them into another state. Mental health does not exist in a vacuum. And the more we understand it, it's the more we can avoid it. And it's the more we can help our family, our church members, our friends to avoid and not to get to that state. Now, what I'd like us to do, honey, is to just look at some of the stages in children, younger and older children, mental health in younger children. Here are some of the signs to look for. Changes in school performance, excessive worry or anxiety, hyperactivity, persistent nightmares, persistent disobedience or aggression. What should parents do when these start to manifest themselves?
Children are usually playful, lovable, adorable. You know, we have two grandchildren. One is 12 months.
And 1. Oh.
12 months going 13 months. Adorable. I can't get enough of him. I kiss his cheek 40 times a minute. The other is 6 years old, and he is just the joy of our life. But we notice these kids are just happy. They are oblivious to the challenges of life. Why? Because their parents try to create an environment that fosters that kind of nurture. My grandson likes to stay up late when we're up late. So we say, no, you have a curfew. You must go to bed because you've got to get up tomorrow morning to go to school. And he whines and he says, I can't wait to be an adult. So I said, let me explain to you what adult life is about. You can choose. You one day you'll become an adult, but think about it. Right now, you're having the best days of your life. Adults have to pay bills. Adults have to take care of problems. Adults have to do. Then he says, "Okay, can I be a child in the day and an adult at nights?" So the idea is that children are supposed to just have fun and do the things that children are supposed to do. They're not supposed to be saddled with sadness. When they live in a home where there's domestic violence, where dad is screaming at mom and mom is screaming at dad and mom is crying and there is just sadness, it depresses the child's serotonin and the child cannot experience pleasure. And the child goes to bed and have nightmares and think they go to school, they can't concentrate because they're thinking, when I go home, will mom still be crying? Will dad be upset? And everybody is walking on eggshell. Friends, that is not God's desire for our homes. Our homes are supposed to be a model of what heaven is going to be like. Father represents God. Do you know when we say our Father which is in heaven, do you know what the child perceives? Their dad. That's what the image of a father means to the child. Think about it. If your child has a negative image of their dad, why is it any wonder that when they get to a certain age and they no longer can be forced to go to church, they don't want to have anything to do with God? Because one boy actually told me he was 25 years old and he was grown up in a Christian home where his father was actually a preacher, a pastor. And they were having lots of problems with him. And he told me in counseling, he said, if God is anything like my father, I don't want to have anything to do with God. Very sad, but he is multiplied by thousands of other children. And so we're saying, friends, that when you see your child exhibiting signs or symptoms that indicate that they're overwhelmed and they're not producing, children are supposed to go to school and make good grades. If their brains are not compromised in any way negatively, they have the ability to study hard, retain what they study, and do well. If that is not happening, there is a problem in the pipeline. So we have to check in and find out what's going on. How can I help you? Rather than criticizing them, why can't you be this? Why can't you be that? And then our kids feel judged and they get sad and they end up suicidal or who knows what else happens.
And the truth be told, the parents, grandparents, or guardian may not feel equipped or capable of handling some of these manifestations. And that's the fact, that's the reality. Sometimes you feel helpless. Sometimes you do your utmost best and you're still not getting the desired result. What we are saying to you today is still you cannot afford to give up, because not doing anything only makes the situation get worse. Find some help somewhere. Maybe your local pastor, maybe someone in your congregation, a nurse, a teacher, or some professional help. Get help outside of yourselves, but don't just because of stigmatization, because of socialization, because of whatever it is. You see the problem, but you don't do anything about it. You see the problem and you throw your hand up in the air and say, well, whatever. You cannot do that. It is said that dysfunctional patterns of behavior that exist in one generation will move on into the next generation. So the problems that are existing in your generation, in your family of origin, if not being helped, there's a strong possibility that your children will take it into their family of origin. And it will exist there. And if they have children, when those children grow up, they will carry those problems over into their dysfunctional patterns of behavior that exist in one generation will be transmitted or carried over into the next generation. So we don't have the choice of not doing anything. Get help from somewhere if you cannot, but something must be done. Now we talk about younger children. Here are some of the manifestations in older children. Changes in ability to manage responsibilities at home or at school. defiance of authority, truancy, theft, and other vandalism. Prolonged negative mood, often accompanied by poor appetite or thoughts of death. Frequent outbursts of anger. Again, we cannot be helpless and hopeless. We have too many youngsters that are exhibiting these behaviors. Parents have to act.
I had a family brought in 2 children. One was a 15-year-old daughter, and the other was a 14-year-old young man, her son. And the mother says, this kid is like her perfect child. He does very well at school academically, he's obedient, but she notices now he comes home and all he wants to do is sleep. He sleeps through the entire, he drops his book bag, and sometimes he falls asleep in his school clothes. He just doesn't, he doesn't participate in activities in the home. He's just secluded and by himself, and she just notices change. And so she got really scared and brought him in for counseling. I spoke to the child, asked him if he agrees with what his mother is saying. He says yes. So I asked the mom to leave the room, and I started to interview him. Because the first thing that occurred to me is this kid is on some substance, because it's not normal for a teenager to sleep through from 4 o'clock until the next morning. So sure enough, when I interviewed him and pressed him, he was taking marijuana. He was with a group of boys who would take him after school to wherever they did this, and he would smoke this substance, and there were other substances that he was inhaling and doing stuff. And so when he got home, he was totally stoned. And to hide it from his mom, that's what he would do. He'd just go to sleep. She just assumed he was so tired, he was, overwhelmed at school, and that's why that was going on. Sometimes parents miss it. Because the child is performing well and is doing good in other areas, we don't think that some of these things could be happening to our little angels. Friends, the devil strikes in our homes, and he wants to destroy our children. When you see a child doing things that you know isn't normal, check it out. Don't just take their word for it, because sometimes they're embarrassed to tell you, or they're afraid to tell you, or they're even ashamed. So we need and when they tell us, don't push back, because when I eventually said to him, I said, listen, I know what you told me is confidential. That is what professional counseling is about. Except when you tell me things that are going to hurt you or hurt somebody else. So I have to get you to tell your mom what's going on. Or if you'd like to give me permission to tell her, then I can bring her in and discuss this with her, because we need to get you help. And he was livid. He started to cry. His mom was going to kill him. I said, no, your mom is not going to kill you. That's how you think right now. And maybe she should, but no, she's not going to kill you. So I brought the mom in, and he said, okay, you tell her. And he started to cry before I even told her. And so I told her, and I explained to her first before I told her, I said, listen, you brought him in for counseling because you need help, and he needs help. And you're going to have to be very sensitive and to be very careful about what I tell you. Of course, I sent the child out before I told her that. So I prepared her for what I was about to tell her. And then I brought him in, and I said, I just had a long talk with your son, and this is what he disclosed. She was totally broken. She was in tears. This is a Christian woman who spent her life caring for her kids. She homeschooled him up to a point so he wouldn't be exposed to public schools, to avoid some of those things. And now, here is her child in a Christian school dabbling with this kind of stuff. She was beside herself. But she embraced him, and she promised him she was going to support him and get him all the help. And thank God, today he is doing much better, got rid of that set of friends, and is on his path. So sometimes we get this information, we scream at the kids, and we push them aside, and we call them names. That's not the way to do it, because they are screaming for help, but they're afraid of your reaction, so they don't tell you until sometimes it gets so worse, they get arrested, or the school dismiss them, or whatever. So a part of the intervention is being very receptive. As much as it hurts your heart, you've got to be able to handle it when you find out and get them the help that is necessary.
We're going to move into the area of how to cope.
Honey, we have 1 minute.
We started out by telling you of the problem, the severity of the problem, right here in your country, and by extension, it would be our churches and our homes. We talk about the etiology of its causative factors. Now, how do you cope if you have a loved one, a church member, a friend, someone who is experiencing one of these symptoms? And the first thing we say is acceptance. You know, some years ago, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote this book on death and dying. And she, in that book, states that when an individual is going through a crisis, a situational crisis, there are 5 stages they go through. And the first stage, she says, is one of denial. And from denial goes to anger, and anger to bargaining. And from bargaining, they move to depression. And the final stage, she says, is acceptance. And that book is a very popular book, has been used in medical schools around the world, et cetera, et cetera. And for years, people held those 5 stages model of how to deal with situational crisis. And then afterwards, some other theorists came and changed that. And what Kubler-Ross has had as the last thing, acceptance, theorists are now saying that's the first thing. Whatever the crisis is, whatever the problem is, your first stage has to be acceptance. That is, you accept, you acknowledge that, yes, I have a problem. Yes, I have a situation. Yes, whatever it is, you start with acceptance and you move on. You move onwards from there. So we are saying, honey, to cope, acceptance is important.
Yes, we've got to accept that the problem exists. If we can't fix a problem that we don't acknowledge exists. So the first thing is to say, my child has a problem, or my wife or my spouse has a problem, and we are going to get help.
But oftentimes, not only do we find it difficult to accept the situation, but we worry. We worry a lot about the neighbor. We worry a lot about our church member. And that worry, does it help or hinder?
It hinders. So we have to, it's going to be very disturbing. Because when you get bad news, you don't feel joyous. You don't feel good about it. But so you have to be able to cope with those feelings. Feelings of embarrassment, feelings of what people will say about your family, feelings of being criticized and being made out to be a monster. Whatever it is that you feel, it's real, it's yours. But you know what? Those feelings change. That's a good thing about feeling. Today you feel sad, tomorrow you might feel happy. So feelings change. And when you get help and you improve, that will change even more. So don't worry about what you're feeling right now. That you're in the bottom of the pit or in the valley, you can get to the mountaintop. You know, we have a song that says, God is God of the mountains, and he's also God of the valley. So he's with you regardless, and there is help regardless of what you're feeling.
A lady brought her teenage son to me some time ago. And having diagnosed the issue, I brought the mother into the session and relayed to her my assessment. She would not accept it. She felt I was saying that her son was crazy, was a lunatic, etc. The social stigma that is attached to mental health. So she took her son, we ended the session and she left, but she didn't follow through with the next appointment and never came back to any more session. 7 months later, the young man got up one morning, left the home, and all he said to his mom was, "You will hear about it." She didn't take it seriously. About 15 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes after, there was a knock on her door. When she opened, it was a police officer. They took her to the scene. The fellow had gone on the 7th floor of a building and jumped to his death. Mental health and suicide, there's a strong correlation there. As a matter of fact, mental illness is one of the frequent causes of suicide. Here in your country, the statistic says 1 in 5 adults with mental illness has considered taking their own life. 1 in 5, that's very high. 80% of students in public schools, 80% of students in public school have at one stage or another considered suicide. Okay. And this is on an annual basis. So you can understand the problem exists here in the UK and around the world, a strong correlation between mental illness and suicide.
Now, we want to help families understand that suicide is never, ever an option. And we know our time is out and we don't have enough time to go into this, but that's another whole seminar. Because we've had a spate of incidences recently where outstanding role models and people that people had the least expectation of committed suicide or completed suicide. We have a large contingency of individuals that use that as a way out. One, they see everything as dark and dismal, they feel no hope, they think they're trapped, and they think, I would rather not be alive than go through whatever it is that they go through. So we're here saying to God's people, never ever should you even entertain the notion of suicide as an option. But if you know somebody in your family that has the ideation, you do need to get help.
Here are some warning signs that you can look for. Substance abuse, significant anxiety or agitation, social withdrawal, active psychosis, plans and preparation. They're making all kinds of plans and preparation, and most times these are negative plans and preparations.
So if you have the idea, it's only an idea. An idea doesn't become an action except you put it in action. So you might sometimes get very overwhelmed and say, you know what, I'd rather die than face the embarrassment. But it's only an idea. Dismiss it. Ask God for forgiveness. Pray about it and get the idea out of your mind. Don't harbor the idea. I usually say to my clients, build a file of pleasant experiences, joyous times that you've had, great experiences that you've had, and keep a file of it. When sad thoughts come and depressive thoughts come, imagine you have a remote control. Change the picture. Change the image in your head. If you don't ruminate and think about it and feed it, it floats out of consciousness and gets submerged into subconscious or someplace else. But it won't stay in the forefront of your thoughts. So that's how you manage that. Don't keep thinking. One person said to me, I can't get it out of my mind. Sometimes you have trauma. You experience abuse or rejection or divorce or whatever it is you go through. And you feel like, oh my goodness, will I ever smile again? And everything looks so dismal. Life changes. By God, all things are possible. So never ever think that the circumstance you're in is going to last forever, because nothing except salvation lasts forever.
Talk to us about developing a safety plan.
A what? Safety plan? I'm trying to tell my husband we're out of time.
No, they told me I have an hour, and I have a timer on my computer.
How much time we have?
I have a time on my computer,
okay,
honey.
all right. It's just a timer in me. So what am I to tell them? So the safety plan.
I think I need to diagnose you to see.
So yes, if you get sad and depressed and you're prone to anxiety and anxiety-producing behavior, have a plan before it actually occurs. So tell yourself, if you ever get to a stage where you feel helpless and you think that you won't be able to manage your circumstance, think of what you could do. So when it happens, you can do it. So you might call a friend, call your mom, go to the therapist, find the pastor, do something, be a part of a prayer circle or something, and you call up somebody, you say, right now I need help, I need somebody to talk with me or pray with me. But don't just stay there and think that things will change. You know, we say one of the signs of poor mental illness or poor mental health is if you keep doing the same things you have always been doing and you expect different results. Everything will follow suit. So don't keep doing the same things and get the same results all the time. Go get help. Reach out to somebody and ask for help. Don't be prideful. You know, sometimes we think we don't want anybody to know what's going on. And do you know you're the last person to know that everybody else knows? People can see through you. And things get around. We don't know how it gets around, but it gets around. And you take one step into church and everybody knows you're sad and depressed because you're just a different person. You're not yourself. So things get around. Go talk to somebody and get help.
And of course, once you realize that this individual is suicidal, this is not something you keep to yourself. Please listen, family members. This is not something you keep to yourself. Get the necessary help. And if you have to take the individual to the hospital, do not be afraid to take the individual to the hospital. Prevention is always better than the result of suicide.
So if somebody says, I'm going to kill myself, it might just be that they're giving off steam. But if somebody says, I'm going to shoot myself, or I'm going to hang myself, or whatever, they take overdose, if they have a plan on how they're going to do it, and they have access to the gun or the rope or the pills, believe them. Don't take it lightly. Get them into the hospital, get them into some person that can assess for further lethality, but reach out, because once there is a way, there will be a way.
So finally, when everything is said and done, if you need to seek professional help, then you should. Professional help, it helps both the individual who is affected and the rest of the members in the family. It helps to set you at ease, to know that your family member is being helped, and it helps the individual so that it can alter the problem and restore them to good health. Many families who have a loved one with mental illness share similar experiences. It is important to remember that there is hope for recovery, and that with treatment, many people with mental illness return to a productive and fulfilling life. Do not believe that once an individual has been diagnosed, that that's it forever. Not at all. With the right help and the right care, that individual can fully function again. And that's why we are stressing that you should get the help. And remember, no matter what it is, my brothers and sisters, no matter what it is, friends, always take it to the Lord in prayer. There are two things we must do. Get the necessary help, and we must also take it to the Lord in prayer. Remember, the words he gave to Jeremiah are the words for you too. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. May God bless each and every one of you, that whatever it is, we will, one, get the necessary help so that our families can function full and well. And two, we will learn to trust him. And as the songwriter says, still I can trust him. I know he will keep me. He has redeemed me, and I am his child. God bless you all.